I'm now joined by Congressman Peter DeFazio from Oregon. He's the chair of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, and last summer he led the passing of the ambitious Moving Forward Act in the House of Representatives. He's now called President Biden's infrastructure plan the biggest thing we've done in 100 years, probably since FDR and the New Deal. Congressman DeFazio, it's great to see you again. Let me just start, because sometimes I think when we're at moments of thinking about doing something big, it's sometimes useful to think about what would happen if we didn't make these investments. What would America look like and feel like if we didn't move at this moment on changing our infrastructure in this country?
Well, we're living with deteriorated and deteriorating infrastructure, everything from sewers that back up, water mains that blow up, massive amounts of congestion, 40,000 bridges on the national highway system need, either substantial repair or to be replaced. 40% of the national highway system is degraded to the point we have to rebuild it from the bed up, not just resurface it, and a $100 billion backlog in transit. If we allow things to continue to deteriorate, we're going to become more and more congested and less competitive in the world economy. And, the toll on people's lives, both individuals and businesses, is many, many, many billions of dollars of wasted time every year.
So I know this is perhaps a silly question, because I know you've written, you and I have discussed much of this before. You've basically written most of the bill, but in terms of the scale and what's needed, is everything we need in this package? When America builds back better in this plan, are there elements that aren't included that we need to think about in the future, or does this set us up well for the next 20 years?
Well, Build Back Better is both a way to deal with climate change. The largest single source of fossil fuel pollution is transportation, and the electrification of the highway network will allow us to move away from that. We also need to rebuild it resilient to things that have already changed with climate, more flooding, more severe weather events, sea level rise. And now we also have new materials that will last longer. So we can build 100-year bridges instead of 60-year bridges. So, these would be very, very long-term investments. So we have amazing opportunities here, particularly with the incredibly strong Buy America provisions. There's no agency of the federal government that is more strict on Buy America than the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure generally. And there's a couple loopholes left that I'm determined to close.
Congressman, this may be an unfair question, but I've talked to CEOs about infrastructure. In fact, we're talking to the CEO of United Airlines on this program, and I asked them, compare what we have in the United States to see what's going on in Asia, in Japan, in China, and other places in the world. And they tell me that the biggest difference between what we do here and what they do there is we have regulatory oversight and certainly, concerns about building, but things just take so long here. Is there something that can be done at the federal level to, not recklessly speed up, but constructively speed up the process that new infrastructure gets deployed?
Well, we have, in the last two service bills we did, we adopted numerous streamlining reforms. Right now, 93% of federal aid highway projects, whether it's a bridge or a highway, can go forward with what's called, basically I'm trying to think of the word. Anyway, with a categorical exclusion. And then about another 4% have to go through, a environmental analysis, which is not particularly rigorous nor time consuming. And then about 3%, huge projects, which have major impacts on a city or a region, go through the National Environmental Review process. We're looking at ways that we can still do that, because we don't want to exclude the public. We don't want to harm the environment. But we're looking at ways that we can expedite that, particularly by appointing a lead agency. A lot of times you'll go through a project. This happened in my state. They were proposing a new bridge over the Columbia River, which ultimately didn't happen, but it has to happen. they got to the very end of the process, and then the Coast Guard came in and said, well, wait a minute, we've got an issue here. So all the agencies need to be at the table from day one and get this stuff done more efficiently. But according to all the analysis I've read, the biggest impediment to moving forward with projects is lack of federal partnership and lack of adequate funding, not the environmental review process. Republicans would like to say, oh, it's the environment. No, it's because we aren't partnering with states and cities to do this stuff. The federal government hasn't increased, the user fees since 1993, and states can't do this on their own. Cities can't do this on their own. It is a national transportation network, and the feds need to be better partners with more robust funding.
Is it your sense that that's happening with the new team, with Secretary Buttigieg, with President Biden?
Well, they have proposed very ambitious numbers that actually are a little bit higher than what was in my bill last year. But that money could be well spent. They're proposing a little more substantial increase in transit. We have a $100 billion backlog to bring existing transit up to a state of good repair, let alone looking at modern new transit, electrified buses, more light rail, more transit options to people, getting into underserved and unserved areas with transit options to connect people to jobs and the economic prosperity of our urban areas. Those are key elements. And then they're proposing a 40% increase in highways and bridges. That's about where I was at last year. And then they're proposing a very large increase in rail and high-speed rail, both to deal with Amtrak's network, and to put out some high-speed rail federal assistance, and then also doing research on new modes and alternate transportation, and substantial investment, what we now call active transportation or alternative transportation, everything from walking to biking to now, obviously, what you're doing with scooters and things like that to connect people to transit or for short errands that they need to run in the cities. And we've got to accommodate all that. And it's going to require a lot of federal investment because we have to make it safer for people, too. We're having an alarming increase in pedestrian and cycling deaths, and we've got to deal with that as part of the package.
Mr. Chairman, I mean, I love that, the way you just described all those elements. You're both talking about conventional form of transportation, but layering over it many new things, high-speed rail, the scooters, the buses, the other dimensions. And I think really importantly, I'm very happy you talked about, reaching underserved communities that, let's be honest, in the past, some major infrastructure projects essentially built out rather than built in communities and divided them. And oftentimes that was along racial lines, and it created real economic differences. I guess my question to you is, when you kind of look, maybe it's Oregon, but when you kind of look at cities in the United States that are their receptivity to what's coming in and trying to sort of look at how they become smarter and better, are there any standout cities and transportation systems where people are moving along the kind of Pete DeFazio way that you say they've got it? Because I think one of the importance of these shows is show and tell, to highlight best and promising practices in transportation. I mean, what turns you on? What excites you in America?
Well, I mean, just start with Secretary Buttigieg and what he did as a mayor. He did complete streets in Indiana. I don't know if any other cities in Indiana have adopted that concept, but the idea is to make it safer for cycling and pedestrians. Actually, make things into more like boulevards, but still be able to move traffic through those areas. Portland, Oregon, years ago, we had built a major road right along, keeping the city away from the Willamette River, and we removed it, and it's now a park. And then you see in New York where they, have the project on, the park on an elevated. And here in D.C., they're doing the same thing with the bridge over the Anacostia River that's going to be put out of service, but it's now going to become essentially a park and that. So there's some really exciting things going on in terms of livability and connecting communities. President Biden has recognized that. My last bill allowed states to spend money to essentially deconstruct or construct in alternate ways transportation routes that had divided communities, and much of this was done intentionally. The president mentioned in particular Skyway down in New Orleans. It's a great opportunity. That Skyway is it's past its due date.
Wow.
It's got to come down. And well, let's not rebuild another Skyway in that way that divides that community. Let's bring it back together and develop alternate ways for the traffic flow. And he's proposed $20 billion of social equity programs to do just that around the country. And I mean, I've been up in Hartford with John Larson a couple of times. They are totally cut off from the river, and a low-income neighborhood is cut off from the river by a highway that, at this point, that needs essentially to be replaced. The bridges have to be replaced, the overpasses, and also the seawall or the flood wall there. So there's great opportunities as we rebuild
Right.
both resilient and in ways that are much more livable and reconnect people as opposed to separating.
I like that vision. Congressman, we have a quick question from our audience from Charles Tyler. Charles?
Hello, my name is Charles Tyler. I'm a retired software engineer. Will there be an effort to set national standards for EV charging equipment, for vehicle-to-grid infrastructure, and for home battery microgrids? Thank you.
Specific question, Congressman?
No, very good question. Yes, we need to have a standardized infrastructure for charging. Obviously, Tesla has a proprietary system, but anything that we put federal money into that isn't totally private needs to be interoperable for all vehicles. The president has proposed 500,000 charging stations. I don't know if that's the right number. It could be bigger than that. But electrification is coming. GM's going all electric. I had a hearing a few weeks ago on the business case for electrification because my Republican colleagues say, no, can't have climate stuff in this bill, so you can't electrify. Well, let's say, okay, well, it's not about climate. It's not about reducing fossil fuel pollution, but it is. But let's say you have to do it because that's where the world is headed. That's where we're headed. I had Fred Smith from FedEx testify, not exactly a bleeding heart liberal kind of guy. And he said, FedEx going all electric. Climate change is real. My customers want to deal with it. So there's that. In terms of autonomous vehicles, we've got problems with the Federal Communications Commission. And they are impinging upon the bandwidth that we need for vehicle-to-vehicle communication. I've opposed this bitterly. They're still moving ahead with it. I've tried to get an appropriations rider. I've tried to get the committee. It's not my committee, doesn't have jurisdiction. The committee of jurisdiction to take strong action. They haven't. Even Secretary Chow objected to what they were doing, but they're still plowing ahead. So that's a potential setback and a potential problem for V2V. And then anything about microgrids and that's all the Energy and Commerce Committee. I don't get to deal with that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, let me invite you on behalf of the Hill. If you want to send me a quick 800 words on that point of concern on the FCC, I'd love to run it. So let me we'll put that there. Well, Chairman Pete DeFazio.
Okay, we can do it.
Great. Well, Chairman Pete DeFazio, Chairman of the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, really appreciate your time and your candid views as always. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. Great interview. I enjoyed it. Thank you.